My friend, today we are joined by Susan Marie Conrad. She's an expedition kayaker, award-winning author, and self-proclaimed adventurepreneur. Wait till you hear what that's all about. In her memoir, Inside, she shares the story of her 1,200-mile solo paddle to Alaska, an epic journey of courage, clarity, and transformation. Beyond the adventure, Susan's become a powerful voice for environmental conservation and women in the outdoors. From reluctant speaker to bold storyteller, she's proof of what happens when we lean into discomfort and share our truth. Let's dive in. Susan, welcome to the show.
Well, oceans of gratitude for having me, Hussein. Just ever since our initial conversation, I've really been looking forward to our chat. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. And you got a big fan club, by the way. Like my friend Rose in the publishing world, a couple of people have mentioned your name, and I'm like, oh, I gotta get this lady on the show. She sounds epic. So yeah, I'm excited that you're here. So thank you for joining me. Yeah. So I want to dive right in. I want to know what inspired you to undertake the Inside Passage that you beautifully write about. And I'm diving in. I got your book a few weeks ago, and I've been reading it on planes and next to my bedside. So I want to know what inspired you to undertake the Inside Passage expedition, and how did that idea just evolve, and what moved you to do something so grand?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was incremental, I would say, but maybe it would be helpful to, in a nutshell, I could describe what the Inside Passage is.
Yes.
It's a water trail, kind of like a hiking trail, but without the signposts and the poison ivy. And a lot of people consider its official starting point to be Seattle, the southern reaches of the Puget Sound, which is a little south of where I live here in Northwest Washington State. And then it goes up along the entire coastline of British Columbia, and then it hops over into the Alaskan Panhandle and goes for about another 400 or 500 miles until you literally run out of ocean in this little town called Skagway, about 1,200 miles later. So in a nutshell, that's the Inside Passage. And I first got introduced to kayaking in college. I went to Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon, majored in journalism. And of course, I connected with the folks at the outdoor program there. And I got into whitewater kayaking, and I really just knew enough to be dangerous. Found myself bouncing down wild rivers in this ridiculously small boat that, you can barely pack a sandwich in. And then a few years later, I discovered sea kayaking in Montana, no less, landlocked Montana. I've always joked that, hey, you don't need the sea to sea kayak, right? Fresh water works just fine. And so it was a sport that I immediately took to because, well, I immediately recognized its potential for solitude. But the big game changer was when I said, or I rather saw, it's like, wow, these long, skinny boats, they have these watertight compartments, these hatches. So think like a floating suitcase. So you can pack all of your camping gear and everything you need to survive and disappear for days, weeks, and for me, what would end up being months at a time to some pretty magical places. So that was my intro. I decided I'm just going to pursue this thing that's just really resonating with me. So I got a job as a guide for a kayak company in Montana. Did that for about almost 10 years. And then I started my own paddle sports company with my then partner, which we ran pretty successfully for almost another decade. And then in 2010, I thought, well, maybe I have enough skills and experience to take on this challenge, this goal that I had of kayaking the Inside Passage from the San Juan Islands here in Washington State to Juneau, Alaska. And I had a mentor. I think, any major endeavor that people take on, you're often going to have some sort of a coach or a mentor behind you.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah. And so his name was Jim Chester, and he has a very, very strong voice in the narrative of my first book of Inside. So, yeah, once I got the crazy idea that I was going to do this, I set a date And I spent almost a year preparing, on many levels, physically, of course, financially, logistically, emotionally, mentally, the whole gamut. Yeah. And so I did that trip, never intended to write a book. The book came 6 years later, and then I got this crazy idea that I was going to do it again. Kind of felt like I was resting on my laurels, so to speak. And so in 2022, at the age of 62, I did it was a slightly different route, much more challenging route, actually. And I always joked that it was 12 years later, 12 years wiser, 12 years slower. So it was a whole different type of journey with a whole different type of, catalyst or impetus, if you will. Yeah.
That's so fantastic. So, we all have this like inner, I feel like this inner voice, at least the way I think about life, but I guess we all have this inner voice, this inner like adventurer in all of us to some degree. Maybe not everybody, but this desire to go explore something that isn't necessarily explored often, especially, just an adventure, right? Like we all want to go to, I just think like, obviously the movies have done a number on all of us, like the Indiana Jones adventures, right? Like the explore, go get out into nature, go do something kind of hard, challenging, risky, I find that very amusing about the human nature and our urge and desire to go and sort of find something that has these elements that can, to me at least, bring something out of us. In your journey, when you started sort of that desire started to brew and you were thinking about going to do the Inside Passage, and you went on and you started paddling, of course, the hundreds and hundreds of things that come up that are always unexpected as we sort of seek an adventure. Even writing a book, I feel like, is that adventure for some people, right? Like it was for me. And all the hundreds of things that come up, right, that you don't anticipate. So you call it like a trail, but it's really not a trail. You still kind of have to rely on your expertise, and you have to kind of read the water, and you got to read so many different elements. Yes. But despite the technique of paddling, which in of itself is literally like, I feel like you're like a professional athlete at that. What, I guess in a way, and I don't mean to sound like woo-woo here, but spiritually, what did you come to terms with throughout that journey with yourself as far as discovery?
That's a great question.
Kind of a long-winded question. Sorry.
Yeah, no. It's great. And I think, it's the reason that we go off on these adventures to do something we wouldn't ordinarily do, right? To kind of go outside of our comfort zones. That was a big thing for me. And before I embarked on the actual journey, even though I'd been paddling for decades, I did this 8-day shakedown trip. So I just wanted to make sure I could cut the mustard for a longer expedition. And I quickly realized on that trip that, I've got all the skills, my body can handle it, but my mind's what's going to control it, right? It's just like dealing with fear and low self-confidence and imposter syndrome. It's like, who am I to think I can really pull this off? And so, dealing, I would say, emotionally and mentally, and I guess it ties into the spiritual component, is just trusting in myself and knowing that everything that I've done in my life has brought me to this point to do this successfully and to be safe. But, keeping my fears in check, that was a big thing. It continues, to be a big thing for me. And a couple of strategies, in dealing with those fears. And that is to make sure that my fears are in sync with my reality, right? That can apply in any arena of our lives, right? Not just on water. So like, is the fear that I'm experiencing, is it directly proportionate to what's really happening, in front of my bow or in front of my face if I'm on land? So I'm always asking myself if this is a real valid threat that demands immediate action, or is it just a perceived threat, based on my assumption that something or someone is going to harm me. So it's huge. It's huge.
That's powerful. I love that you base it in reality. I think that's such a powerful move to think through that. So if you don't mind me asking, what was a fear that came up for you, either before, during, or after even the journey, maybe even during the journey? What's something that kept coming up for you?
Yeah, it ended up being, I worked with this amazing editor, and it was just this whole courage thing. It ended up being like the narrative arc throughout the book. And like the opening scene is, the worst part of the trip where I'm just ready to throw in the towel. It's just like, okay, this wasn't in the brochure. Whose idea was this? And it's just me questioning myself fairly early on in the trip, when things are already going sideways, if I have the courage and the tenacity and the staying power and all of that to really, make it through till the very end.
Yeah. I love how you explored so much of that sort of resilience and that courage really early on in the book too, because it was like there's something about doing really difficult things, but there's also something about signing up for them. Like it's a choice that you're sort of like, there's a lot of unknown, but there's a lot of things I do know, and somewhere in the middle they're going to cross, right? And whatever I don't know, I have this thing, this third element, which I'll figure it out. Right? It's that I'll figure it out moment that I feel like defines a lot of humans' courage, because that's the trusting yourself. That's the trusting your abilities, trusting the process, and moving through it. That tenacity is beautiful, and there's something about that. I think, having lived through a wild journey of my own, I feel like life in of itself, having lived through a refugee camp, there's something about that makes me perceive the world differently. So when you were done, exhausted, how long were you on this journey altogether?
The first trip that this book is about, let's see, 66 days. The second journey was 78 because it was much more challenging.
Sure. Sure. 66 days. Like, I cannot imagine how exhausted you must have been after that. But I want to know, how did it feel? What did you like, maybe the days, the weeks, the hours after, or maybe even the months after? Like, how did you feel reflecting on what you had just not only signed up for, but actually did and finished? What did it feel like for you?
Well, when my bow scrubbed up at the finish line in Juneau, Alaska, yeah, for sure, it was a feeling of incredible accomplishment. But my story takes a bit of a twist, and I won't go into too much because it'll be a spoiler for the book. But it's hard to return to your everyday life. You've been living in this state of solitude and having all these profound experiences, and then you have to transition back to your everyday life. And I was kind of robbed of that experience because my life went sideways again when I got back, just almost 2 weeks to the day when I returned from the first journey. So I weathered that terrible time in my life. And it's interesting because ever since that first journey at the Inside Passage and writing the book, it's become a benchmark, right? Much like your childhood experience. It's become a benchmark for everything that I do. And, that word tenacity plays back in. I realized, okay, I did the Inside Passage, and that was challenging in and of itself. And that means, I can deal with any challenge that's put in my path in my everyday life, the tumultuous seas of everyday life, as I refer to it. If I could do that, I definitely have the courage and the staying power to deal with anything that's placed in my path.
Beautiful. During your adventure, what was the most beautiful moment you got to experience?
There were so many that's just so hard to quantify. But if I had to pick, oh boy, the people that I encountered along the way, for sure. It was a solo trip. There was a lot of solitude, but I would come into these ports. I had to resupply, right? I'm an amphibious creature. And so every 10 days to 2 weeks, I would paddle into these small communities where I would ship my resupply box ahead and usually get a shower, have a roof over my head, and just eat copious amounts of calories and all of that. But just the people that I met along the way, and even en route in some of these other communities where I wasn't intending to resupply, that they wanted to put a pillow under my head and a roof over my head, and they wanted to fatten me up and give me an icy cold glass of Chardonnay, and whatever the case may be. That was just like what really truly warmed my heart.
I love that.
Yeah.
Isn't it beautiful how we go into solitude only to, like, in a way, fall in love with our own humanity again? Like, just see the essence of it and not see it for judgment or color or language or really anything. It's just like you just see the humanity, which is kindness and like love and like support. It sounds like that's what you experience, and I love that. That's so beautiful, because you didn't say scenery, although I'm sure you saw tons of scenery. Like beautiful,
whales,
majestic
icebergs,
yeah,
at peaks, and phenomenal whale experiences where I could just practically reach out and touch them, and they would oscillate underneath the kayak. But I tell you, having a 40-ton, 40-foot, creature kind of do that. It's a little nerve-wracking. I got used to it, but it's a wee bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah, that's what a remarkable experience, though, because I'm like, how many people can actually say that about their life? Like, I got to see and feel this majestic being play underneath my kayak. I think that's so beautiful. This is one of the reasons I really wanted to interview you, was because I feel like in sharing stories like this, I can almost feel that energy. I can almost imagine what that would be like. I could almost imagine that person putting the pillow under your head, and I think this is the transfer of energy that we can sort of give our audience, right? Or things like that, is living a dream, doing something difficult, doing something challenging like this. It's not about, like you said, the solitude or the beautiful scenery. It's whatever. It's really, there's something about rediscovering ourselves, realigning with our truest nature. And I feel like human beings have done things like this for all of time. And to tap in and re-explore that, I think it's so beautiful. So I want to go a little bit deeper. You mentioned that you're an editor, that your editor encouraged you to go beyond the straightforward adventure narrative. How did this push influence the depth and authenticity that you have in your memoir? Because it is so rich.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's an interesting story, because when I wrote the book, when I first was crafting the book, I should say, it was just going to be an adventure story, nothing more. It's just about me in a boat going up this coastline. And I honestly felt that people didn't need to know about all that other stuff, like all the messy stuff in my childhood. And so that's the story that I originally wrote. And I paid out of my pocket for an editor, because I felt that my first book, I wanted it traditionally published. So I wanted it to be as clean as possible. So this editor had some great suggestions, and we shaped it into an adventure tale, basically. And, it had just a teeny tiny bit of my backstory in there, but it was pretty safe and untelling, I would say. So anyway, I shopped the manuscript out to several publishers, quite a few publishers, and I finally get accepted. It's a small house, but they specialize in Alaskan literature, so it was a good fit at the time. And they, of course, bring in their own in-house editor, and they massage the story even more, make it stronger and cleaner and all of that. But it was literally in the 11th hour. Like the book's already, it's formatted into book form. We have a launch date. I've got my book tour all lined up, and it's like all systems go. And they bring in at the last minute a freelance editor who specializes in narrative nonfiction, especially adventure literature. And he really likes female adventure literature. So they put this gal in. Her name was Janet. And, her job isn't to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, any of that. It's just looking for wonky formatting and any kind of conceptual issues. And so she reads the book and she calls me up and she's like, Susan, I love the story. You brought me along for the ride. I was there in the cockpit with you every stroke of the way. But she said, there's one thing, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's some inconsistencies and discrepancies. And I'm just like, I knew right where she was going with this. And she said, it's almost always in reference to your childhood and to your dynamics and all of that. And I'm just like, oh, good grief. And so she
caught me.
Yeah,
she caught me.
big time. And so she read a few examples from the manuscript, and by now I'm just kind of like reeling. And so I shared with her some of these stories, and she was like, whoa, okay, well, it's kind of an all or nothing thing, Susan. It has to be, you either have to take everything out and just make it purely an adventure story. Otherwise, your readers are going to feel like they're being misled, or you're not being totally honest, with them. Or you have to, go deep, go vulnerable, and put this into the story. And so I had a couple conversations with my then partner and a close cousin who knew all of that backstory. And I was like, stop the presses. I went in and I rewrote the beginning of the book, and I threaded that throughout the narrative and kind of tied it in with how I had some closure with this. And I kind of referred to this 1,200-mile journey as aqua therapy, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It really had all these, epiphanies and realizations along the way, and just kind of letting a lot of that go. So I'm really glad that we did that, though. It was really hard, going deep and vulnerable like that. But I think it makes the story so much more powerful. And just the people who have reached out to me, men and women that have, experienced similar childhood injustices, and just like, just thanking me for sharing that and inspiring and motivating them to maybe make changes in their life. It's huge.
Isn't that powerful? Yeah. I love that so much. I deeply resonate with this. It's one of the reasons I wrote my book. And honestly, I'm like, oh, I've told the story. I was in this camp and this after this war, and I'm just gonna, like you said, like tell the story. But man, did I not have a clue what was about to happen. Right. And it was the deepest, most cathartic, therapeutic thing. This is literally, I fell in love with art and writing even more, because I finally saw it as medicine, like for my soul, like not for my body, but it just needed to come through the body. And when you see it reflecting back at you like that, it means you processed it in some way. At least you got it out. At least you can reflect on it. And it sounds like this is the thing that you sort of went through as well. So it sounds like the passage was this journey to the inner soul, and the writing was the reflection of that. That deep cathartic space that you needed to go reflect. And it's like, you said earlier, like, which I love so much, like the journey, like everything that you had done up to that point was like preparing you for this journey.
Yes.
But it sounds like the passage was really internal, right? It was like you were going through these challenges and slowly unraveling them. And in a lot of ways, they're tied to your childhood. They're tied to traumatic experiences. They're tied to injustices and things that many of us feel. And so many of us go through the world trying to figure out, without even knowing that that's part of you, whether it's drugs, alcohol, running for hundreds of miles, or being like an extreme athlete or whatever. Perhaps we're not running from it, but maybe running towards it.
Yes.
But we just need that map to go further inside into our soul and like unravel that a little bit. I love that so much. This is why I was like really attracted to your story, and because these are things that I've struggled with, right? These are things that I know that I went through. And when I see it in someone else, it really helps me remember humanity. Like it really helps me like feel like, this sense of connectedness, that we are tied through this ginormous thread together, and our experiences are not solo things. They're actually shaping other people's experiences, whether they know it or not. And so to be conscious of that is such a beautiful thing. It's not a negative thing. It's a very beautiful thing, because then you're really conscious about the words you choose, conscious about the adventures you go on, the people you want to be around. And you're such a beautiful reminder of that to me. So thank you for taking the time to stop the presses and like go deeper, and like allow yourself to go deeper to get that therapy, like for yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, switching gears here a little bit. You say, I love this word, adventurepreneur. Honestly, I'd never seen it before, but it's
really?
beautiful. Yeah, I saw the word authorpreneur at one point, and I was like, that's literally my life. I love that. So I use it for my newsletter. But tell me, like, I guess in a way, define it for me. You embrace the term, but how do you define this role, and what does it encompass in your life today?
Yeah, adventurepreneur. So there's a kind of a personal story that segues into that ties into that concept nicely. And it starts with three seemingly innocuous words, right? Life goes on. So, in the context of this story, those words, they kind of stunned me, and they actually pissed me off. So, when I go off on these long journeys, I'm gone for months at a time, and I'm obviously out of my normal everyday routine. And I'm living in this state of heightened awareness when I'm out there. And oftentimes there's endorphins and adrenaline and cortisol and all these stress hormones coursing through my body. And I'm also experiencing this beautiful solitude, and I'm unplugged from our hectic wired world. So that gives me lots of opportunity to reflect and to reconnect, not only with myself, with my heart, but with Mother Nature and Mother Ocean, and all of that. The experience is really profound. But at some point I have to return, right? I have to return to my everyday off-water life. And I refer to that as my reacclimation phase. And that can be challenging. And for some adventures, for really hardcore adventures, there's actually like a post-journey depression, it's a thing. And so this is after the 2022 expedition, where I was gone for almost 3 months, and I'm literally less than 2 months out from having returned. So I'm, reacclimating, and I'm hanging out on a beach with some of my buds, and, we're just chilling, we're shooting the breeze, and it's happy hour. And one of my friends, well-meaning, she had no clue, how this affected me, but she asked me how I was reacclimating, because she heard me throw that phrase around. And so, I thought about it. I wanted to be honest, and I said something along the lines of like, well, I'm struggling internally. The trip feels like it was something in the far distant past already, something like that. And she said, well, we all have these amazing experiences, and then life goes on. It's like life goes on. It just like, it hit me. And I was like, because I was struggling, and I felt like something had died inside me, and I felt like I was trying to find my footing again. And so those words, life goes on, was almost akin to saying that to someone who just lost someone, close to them.
Yeah.
But, I hid my feelings. I'm pretty good at masking my feelings, and just continued on with the evening. But then for the next few days, I just kept processing, like, why did those three words just hit me so viscerally? And finally, the light bulb goes off, right? Life goes on. It's like, wait a minute, this is my life, right? This is my life work. This is my soul work. This is I'm an adventurepreneur. This is what I do. And part of the reason that I go off on these long journeys is so that I can come back and, share it with others and hopefully inspire and motivate others to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do. Right. So that's when it's like, okay, I've got to change. I've got to change something here. I've got to just move past this feeling of being an imposter, really, like the trip happened to somebody else, like it's in the far distant past. So that was a little bit of work, but what I basically did, the short of it is I owned it. I owned this accomplishment. I stepped into it and I expanded on it. And I realized I've got to, how's a saying go, you have to shift your mentality to create a new reality. So I just started.
Well said.
That it's like, okay, I'm going to redefine who I am. I am an adventurepreneur. And I love how you use the word authorpreneur. So it's kind of a combination of, commingling those two, of my passion of adventure with my entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah. So it's like, I'm going to redefine myself. I'm an author. I'm a writer. I'm a speaker. I love how my role has evolved into mentoring and coaching other adventurers. And I'm also an adventure ambassador. So just kind of, tying this all in and just stepping up to the plate and just owning that experience. And it ended up being a major shift for me and factored into, writing this next book, which is about that journey that had a whole different, cause and cause and effect sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who knew? Life goes on, right?
Life goes on. Yeah. That's really beautifully said too, because I think this idea of, at first you're in your reality, your world. And then you kind of go off on this adventure, and then you discover this other world that is so everything. It has all these new experiences. Solitude. It's this. It's dependent on you, and there's just so many dynamics there.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's the crossing the threshold of going back and forth.
Yeah.
Right. And what I am hearing is that there came a moment where you realize, oh, there doesn't need to be. They're one of the same. They're actually intertwined. That one feeds the other. Right. It's your entrepreneurial spirit that helps you. Like sometimes that becomes a little chaotic. So you kind of need to go and escape and do the thing and do the thing. So you can come back and share about it from your experience and lived experience, so that it feels as real and as authentic as it can be, which I love, because that demolishes the imposter. That demolishes that identity, that ego that's like, who are you to do that? And now you're saying, I'm actually the person that does that. That's what I do. I'm great at that. And so I want to help you do that too. And here are the things that come up for me. And so it sounds like, instead of a gate or a barrier between the two worlds, it sounds like now you have sort of this beautiful opening where you can access both and freely walk from the ocean to the thing and really own it. And I love Adventurepreneur because, it brings that adventure to your world. And you also need that adventure to have the entrepreneurial spirit. So I just love how one feeds the other. That's how I feel about writing books. So I did my book. I was like, oh my God, this is such a cathartic, beautiful journey. Everyone should do this, in a way. But I'm like, I don't consider myself necessarily like an editor or a writer. I'm like, but I know this whole marketing world inside and out. I know design, development, and web, and I can help you get leads and like all these things. And I'm like, well, how does that fit in this world? How can I bridge these two? And it clicked. I was like, oh, this is where I feel home. This is where I feel myself the most. And so I just need to bring these little components together. Well said. I love that. I think if you're out there and you're sort of struggling between two worlds, look, I struggled between being a Arab American and American, and I was like, no, I'm just human. Like, let's just bring it all together. let's just be real here. Those are all like branding things, And I was just like, I get to be from this part of the world, but now I get to live in this part of the world, and I just need to embrace both identities and be human. And once I did that, literally everything felt, in a way, a little bit easier for me. No tension inside anymore. It sounds like that's what you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a process, right? It's not always that simple, but like
right.
you,
right. Yeah,
sharing
definitely a process.
Sharing all of your expertise, and you're ultimately helping other people, and I feel that's that's what I'm doing. It's like almost like the classic hero's journey, where you leave the ordinary world, you go out and you have this adventure, and you have all these thresholds and challenges, and then you come back and you share the so-called elixir with the tribe. But sometimes the elixir is just sharing these stories, and I've always felt that by sharing something profound, that I'm going to help my readers or listeners discover something profound about themselves, and that just puts the exclamation point on it for me. I love that. It's just like, okay, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this work.
Yeah, so beautifully said. Okay, so this work, this alignment, this sort of coming to terms with Adventurepreneur has led you to collaborating with the Pacific Wild Highlights, to your commitment to conservation. How has that relationship with nature influenced your advocacy work and efforts?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. I've always felt that you only conserve what you love, and you only love what you understand. So it's interesting. This didn't so much play into the first book, or the first journey and the first book, as it does into the second, because the second time around, I wanted to be more than, not that the first book was just me in a red kayak, plying the coastline of North America, but I wanted a way to give back. And one of those ways to give back was to raise awareness for, the fragile marine ecosystems that I was paddling through. And so I connected with Pacific Wild, which is a Canadian nonprofit conservation association. And I've been following the work and supporting them for years. And so before the trip, we had this chat, and I was like, how can we use my expedition as a platform of sorts to raise awareness for the pivotal work that you guys do? Because it's this couple that started Pacific Wild that pretty much dedicated their entire lives to protecting an area known as the Great Bear Rainforest, which is most of the central coast of British Columbia. And it's an area that's, it's a globally important ecosystem that's under all kinds of threats. For example, fish farms, trophy hunting, oil tankers, and really extensive logging, to name just a few. So, they're working, to protect this. So it's just like, how can we use my journey to raise awareness? And so they put their thinking caps on, and it ended up being such a phenomenal experience where they set me up. This is before we had, Starlink and all these different types of remote connectivity devices. And, when you're out there, you really don't want to be connected anyway.
Yeah.
But this was less than like a 3-week component of almost a 3-month trip where I was collaborating with them. So they sent me out with this device where I could get a satellite signal, and I could relay my experiences and send short videos and entries from my trip journal, voice memos, and images. Yeah. And so they, in turn, they had this story map, which is basically this online, where they brought my experience to life, like real time while it was underway. And they had the map, satellite tracking device.
That's so cool.
Oh, it was really cool. And the link is on my website, where you can actually see what they created. It was just phenomenal. And they turned it into a fundraising effort as well. We ended up raising $40,000, all of which was back into Pacific Wild's marine protection campaigns. So really cool.
That's so powerful.
Yeah. It's really powerful.
Man, talk about the thread. Yeah. That's remarkable. And that's so inspiring. I think when you start to live not on your purpose, a lot of people say that, I call it like living from your purpose. Your purpose is that compass. I feel like the compass led you to the passage, that internal compass, right? It led you then to really getting to know yourself and kind of coping with things in the past. And then it leads you to bridging the identity. And then it leads you to this opportunity where you can help, use what you're doing to something even bigger than yourself. And then it leads you to helping other people go through that journey, and maybe they can create something else because you can't do it all alone. It's like, what are you passionate about? I'm passionate about trees. Well, maybe you can use your trip for that. And it's like, it's a constant inspiration of just a person with a kayak. And this is like, this kayak has led me through this like spiritual realm and the real world and like water. It's just beautiful how it's sort of interwoven all these experiences. I want to talk a little bit about Audrey Sutherland's influence, and them being sort of an inspiration on you. Can you share a little bit about Audrey?
Absolutely. So Audrey Sutherland, she's my hero, my inspiration. And so she's been referred to in kayaking circles as the grande dame of expedition paddling. So she is a woman who had logged tens of thousands of miles, almost always solo, and in a kayak. And she did this. She didn't start paddling until she was my age, her early 60s. And she did this in her 60s, 70s, and into her 80s. So this woman had like fabulous genetics and hardcore. And she's got an amazing story. And so part of the impetus for me to want to do a second Inside Passage trip was I had reread, like for the third or fourth time, her third and last book, Paddling North, which was published by Patagonia Books. And it tells the story of her earliest kayak expeditions in Southeast Alaska in the early 80s. So she was about my age when she did that trip. And so I reread that book, and it's like ridiculously highlighted and sticky noted and dog-eared. And I just remember almost defiantly closing the covers of that book and saying, the world needs to know more about this person. And that's when I decided that I was going to recreate her route, the Alaskan portion of the route, as close as I could, from Ketchikan to Skagway. And so I pitched my tent on some of the same beaches that she did. I slept in some of the same Forest Service cabins that she did, soaked in the same hot springs. And I even recreated some of the camp recipes that she shared in her book. So like my goal was to like ultimately feel the essence of Audrey along the way. And so I did that. And then I interviewed people along the way too, that remembered her coming into these communities. And it just opened up all these profound connections. And writing the book about her, the book that I'm working on now is part biography of Audrey and part, memoir of like, I essentially curated this experience of recreating her experience. So I really want to, in this new book, I just want to portray her not only as the remarkable woman that she was, but as the legend that she came to be. And so that's where I'm at with that right now. Audrey passed away in her home in Hawaii, Oahu. Let's see, that would have been 2015. She was 94, and she was in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's. But she's a legend, absolutely. And I want the world to know more about her.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
I love that. Yeah. Shout out to the ones that move us, inspire us, and the ones we admire the most, and the ones that we want to, like, in a way, retrace their steps so that we can feel their essence, their story, but also feel it for ourselves. And I think those are the most beautiful, inspiring people. For me, it was my father, and I'm sure others who I admired as well. But like, there's always somebody in your life or in someone's life that just sort of acts as that North Star of inspiration. And I love that. I'm excited for your next book. I want to hear more about Audrey.
Yeah.
So this, of course, led you to empowering women in the outdoors. So as an ambassador for Women Who Paddle, what message do you hope to convey to women hesitant about embarking on outdoor adventures?
To women that are hesitant. Well, it just circles back to, a belief in yourself, right? Just that, well, first you have to make sure that you've got the skills, right? You don't want to just willy-nilly go out there and put yourself in harm's way. So my first piece of advice is always to, especially in a kayaking context, is, go out and get professional instruction and make sure you've got the right gear, the right immersion wear, and the right skill set, to deal with, say, an unexpected capsize or just, controlling the boat in rough seas. Just get all that under your belt. And then where you're actually contemplating a journey or on a journey, you just kind of like what I did. You have to keep your fears in check, and everybody's got like a different
Flavor
for doing that. Yeah. And like I think one of the biggest another strategy for me was this phenomenal quote that, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank here.
Okay.
Give me just 1 second.
Okay.
Gosh, and I used it in my previous slideshow presentation. Gosh, it's escaping me right now, but fear, that's it. Fear, when one's mind is made up, fear diminishes. Rosa Parks, gosh. And so, yes. So it's like, you got to make up your mind that you're going to have this adventure of a lifetime, and fear is not going to get in your way. That would be my advice.
I love that. That's so beautiful. I think your story is not only inspirational, but it's admirable, and you show that courage so well. But of course, if you're out there and you want to get on an adventure, whatever it may be, look for someone like Susan, who is who's an adventurepreneur. And I think you can learn so much from her. Susan, I have your website here, but tell me a little bit about how people can come to you, work with you. How do you help people today? Like, what's your work predominantly in the entrepreneurship space?
Well, people can reach out to me through my website, just the contact me link there, and email me is best. And I love answering questions, coaching, not just paddlers, but I get a lot of inquiries from people who want to write. Whatever their adventure may be. Doesn't necessarily have to be kayaking the Inside Passage or anything of that sort, but they want to write about their experience. Maybe they hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, or any number of adventures like that, and just to kind of walk them through that process and send them all kinds of recommendations for books and websites and webinars and links and that sort of thing. I love doing that. So don't hesitate. And all my social media links, of course, are on my website, Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm spending more and more time on LinkedIn thanks to you.
Yeah, of course. I love it. Susan, it's been an absolute privilege and an honor to have you on the show. I've learned so much about you and love sort of just feeling your presence and your spirit today. It makes me want to go on an adventure of some kind, even though I feel like my life in of itself is one bit giant adventure. But yeah, thank you so much for your reminders today to trust ourselves, to go there, to go to those spaces where we can find more of ourselves. That is really beautiful. And to not only that, but really reconnect with our own humanity and other people's humanity, because people are kind, people are beautiful, they are generous. We just need to go and look for those qualities, and I feel like they will reveal themselves. So thank you so much again for that beautiful reminder today, at least for me. If you're out there and you want to read an incredible book, here it is. It's called, let's see here if I can get it. Well, I'll put it on the edit. Inside: One Woman's Journey Through the Inside Passage. I promise you, it's full of amazing, courageous sort of mini stories, all tucked into this beautiful journey. So it's definitely worth the read. Again, Susan, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. The pleasure's all mine.